Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next update to the Conservative uh, Party leadership race 2022. Now, just as the start off the beat here, I'm going to say this again. I'm going to probably be saying this for a while. The Atchison and the Baber numbers are not very solid because they're not being polled very clearly. Specifically, for some reason, people keep lumping them in, such as Ecos keeps lumping them in as other, even though the other column has 28% nationally. Obviously, it's less among conservative supporters, which is why the Poilievre's dominating it. But if you just look at all Canadians, they're like 27% between the two of them, but they don't break them out individually. So I'm really just stabbing at a best guess of where the two of them are. I could be completely wrong. At the moment, with the data I have available, I'm expecting 100% of my error, almost 100% of my error, be coming from Atchison and Baber as a result. Now, it might be that there's error in Brown and Lewis and Charest and Poilievre, but the origin of the error is that Baber and Atchison's numbers are just wrong. Probably. Now, what I will say, though, is while I'm not 100% confident in what Baber and Atchison's actual vote support is, specifically to the distribution of them, and I should also note there's about 3% that are not included on this, actually best shown here. About 2.5% are undecided. And why are they undecided? Because the polling is being stupid. Not much you can do with dumb polls. But what I will say, though, very important, is while I am not certain between the undecideds and the Baber and the Atchison what the relative percentages is for all of those categories, I am very confident in this ranking. I'm very confident that Poilievre is still dominating the field by any measure. And I'm extremely confident that each candidate right now is in this order. Now, the exact number of points they're getting and the exact popular vote share might be different. But this ranking of 1 to 6, I am very confident in. And I am very confident that Poilievre would win first ballot. The exact percentages, I'm not super confident in because the polling data is awful. So then you might ask yourself, well, why are you doing an update if the polling data is awful? Well, mostly because, well, there's a lot of data, or there's been several polls released since the last update, and yes, the data's bad, but the point of this channel, and the point of what I do, is to try to take crappy polling data and make it useful. Because, realistically, most polls suck. Some polls are less sucky than others, but they always neglect information that I want. They always oversimplify things. Oftentimes the questions aren't great, or they're up to the quality I want them to be. They never satisfy me, at least. And I think anyone else who's similarly familiar with polling should also not be very satisfied. So there's lots to be said that there's always room for failure here. The other thing I will note is the last two polls I'm using are from Ecos, and I've completely dropped the Saskatchewan and Manitoba subsamples from them because they seem stupid. And first off, one of them had a sample size of like 14 for Saskatchewan and Manitoba, which is not collectively, but 14 for Saskatchewan and like 14 for Manitoba, which has to be dropped just on principle because it's not a scientific sample. That's not a statistically valid sample size, so it's an anecdote now, not even a poll. You can't even call that a poll. It's not a relevant sample size. It's actually improper that ECOS published those results for Saskatchewan and Manitoba with such a small sample size. That is a slight on ECOS because that is not a statistically valid sample size. It is not proper polling. It's nonsense and noise. And then you combine that with the result being yielded from them is just ludicrous. Specifically, it's suggesting that Saskatchewan and Manitoba are overwhelmingly going to Charest. Which is just, well, is just silly. I don't understand how ECOS got those numbers and was like, yep, this is fine. We're going to publish this. So I've neglected those two as a result. And, well, I'm sure I'll probably have to neglect more going forward because... well, I guess it's not unheard of for me to neglect a polling result because, frankly, sometimes you do get ridiculous things like this. And here we go. This is... I just brought it up on my other screen here, so I'll bring it over. So this is their second last poll. So this is older. So this is before the race was down to 6. So the other column's more acceptable in this case, but it's still kind of ridiculous because 29% of all Canadians support other, and there's, I believe, 6 other people counted here. But someone like Lewis is out at 4.7%. The average person should be getting around 5% in this other. So this is already ludicrous. But we look at Saskatchewan and Manitoba here. 16, 17. That's slightly wrong. Not statistically valid sample sizes. There's a reason why Atlantic is grouped as 1. Now, could argue Saskatchewan and Manitoba are being grouped here as 33. But that's also an extremely low sample size, meaning the margin of error is ludicrous at 17 percentage points, and down here, 24 percentage points, 24 percentage points. Ludicrously high margins of error on these. And the result also doesn't make any sense. We look here. Charest does mediocre in BC, bad in Alberta, mediocre in Ontario, but does very good in Manitoba and Saskatchewan? Who believes that? Who believes that at all? Then you look at Poilievre. Fantastic in Alberta, good in BC, mediocre in Ontario, awful in Saskatchewan. Who believes this? Name me a single person who sits down and is like, you know what, Saskatchewan, the province that's reliably voting the most conservative federally between People's Party and the Conservative Party in the last, I believe, 3 elections, doesn't like Poilievre at all, but loves Charest. What? Either ECOS is really bad at sampling in Saskatchewan, because, frankly, the rest of their numbers seem perfectly reasonable to me. So either the Saskatchewan and Manitoba sampling is awful, or they are intentionally doing this. Now, I don't want to provide malice to the ECOS staff, though it is a bit suspect considering what Frank Graves has said on Twitter regarding him extremely not liking Poilievre. So it does put suspect to this, but I'm not discarding the poll from that, because just because someone decides to make a stupid partisan statement does not strictly mean the poll is dumb. It just means you have to look at it very carefully. You combine that with this just doesn't make any sense. And additionally, Lewis getting 11.6 in Saskatchewan is also very unlikely considering she scored very high in Saskatchewan. I believe she had 30% in the last race, actually. Why am I even speculating? Give me a moment. I will just confirm that. In the first round, Lewis got 40% of the vote in Saskatchewan last time. So you're telling me the province that voted 40% for Lewis, 18% for Derek Sloan, i.e., 58% of Saskatchewan Conservative supporters voted for Lewis and Sloan. And we can argue, based on federal numbers, that is 30% of the population of Saskatchewan, roughly, because what, 60%? It's more like 60%, or 35% of the population of Saskatchewan, because about 60% vote Conservative, and 50% of Conservatives preferred a socially conservative candidate in Saskatchewan. So by proxy, about 35% should support this. That's what you'd expect. Now maybe you could argue someone like Poilievre might be eroding some of Lewis's numbers, but you would expect, generally speaking, that Lewis and Poilievre should be getting around 35% nationally. They're getting 21.6. That doesn't really make any sense at all. It seems so out there, it's laughable. And by similar logic, you could get a similar result out of Manitoba, though not quite as extreme. And the idea that Charest is more popular in Saskatchewan and Manitoba than BC or Ontario is laughable. So, I've neglected these two, and I've also done it in the most recent ECOS poll. I just can't actually get a PDF for that to load right now because ECOS's website sucks for some reason. So, where does that leave us? Well, I spent 12 minutes complaining about polling. Let's actually discuss. Let's quickly just run over how the race is shaping up. So right now, Poilievre's still the oppressive lead. He's still going to win on first ballot. Brown is gaining some ground, though I suspect Brown's not actually gaining ground. I think it was more like he was represented before, underpolled. Now, there's a difference between gaining ground and being underpolled. It's kind of slight, but basically, I think his support before in previous updates was probably lowballed by the polling, and this seems more accurate to me. He's not particularly popular among the party supporters, but I believe last time he was like 4% or something. 7% does seem more likely, especially with where Charest is. I wouldn't be surprised, all told, if Charest and Brown, maybe Aitchison eating into that a bit, get collectively about 30% of the vote, because that seems to be roughly the vote share that McKay got in the first round. And I'm really expecting Brown, Charest, and Aitchison to get close to 30%. Though maybe you could argue that Poilievre's eating some of that too, so not quite, but about 30% is what I suspect those three candidates will get. And Aitchison's not only drawing support from Red Tories, but he is drawing some support from them because he's kind of going the alley of it's a strange campaign decision, though it seems like he sincerely holds his position, so I give him credit for that. I much prefer a candidate doing a sincere campaign than one where they are cynically going for the most votes. He seems to be running like just right of the Red Tories. So if we make a scale of conservatism, with 0 being you're not a conservative and 10 being you are completely conservative in every way, shape, and form on every issue, let's say the Red Tories are like a 3. They're mostly economically conservative, not very socially conservative at all. Frankly, they're kind of socially progressive, but they're about a 3. The True Blues are like 5. They're like the middle conservative. Wow, surprise. Bell curves, right? Aitchison's running on like a 4 campaign right now. So it's like, oh, that's a choice. I don't think it's going to be very successful, but I applaud him for trying. maybe I'm going to be wrong on this, but I just don't really see him getting much traction because he's running a bit to the right of the red Tories, but he's also running a bit to the left of the mainstream of the party. Not quite a lot to the left, but a little tiny bit to the left of the mainstream of the party, so I'm not really expecting him to get much traction there. Brown and Charest are pretty straightforward. They're running at red Tories. Now, they're doing the lip service of, we're not red Tories, they're trying to run as number 4s too, actually. Interestingly enough. Though I don't know anyone who believes it. I've talked to a lot of people online and in person who are politically aware and or conservative voters, and no one really believes Brown or Charest are quote unquote not a red Tory. And I think that's going to be really their prohibitive thing going forward. And actually, because the Conservative Party runs the stupid instant runoff system, which I've discussed in another video titled Instant Runoff, conveniently enough, they might actually spoil each other out to irrelevance here. Good old spoiler effect. Some people claim that there's no spoiler effect in instant runoff, but there is a spoiler effect. It's not the same spoiler effect, but it still exists. They might kill each other off, which will be funny. I don't really go into that too much detail, but just consider that as a possibility. It's a bit more complicated instant runoff than like first past the post, but it still exists. So then we have let's say Lewis. Lewis seems to be she seems much more impassioned now and much more relaxed public speaking than she was in the 2020 race. Though she really doesn't seem to be getting the traction this time around, but I will concede she was horrifically underpolled last time around. I think she was polling at like 11% and she got 25%. So I'm suspecting she's going to get a ballot box bump, and I'm also suspecting that might be a big part of my error. I don't think it's going to meaningfully affect the result. Though, in fact, I might not even... it probably won't affect the result at all. But it is a thing that I am watching for, though there's really not much I can do about that because I just don't have the data. And possibly, actually, if she does get a ballot box bump, it's probably going to be at the expense of Charest and Brown. Because we look at the last race as possibly indicative of going this one. The red Tory wing was... McKay was polling at about 40%, and he clearly stands with the red Tory wing of the party. And really, the first round he got 30%, so he was approximately underperformed, or overpolled by 33%, that's a better way to say it. He was overpolled by about 33%, and Lewis was underpolled by 50%, i.e., she did twice as good as her polling, and McKay did 3/4 as good as his polling. So I suspect we might see a similar effect between Brown, Charest, and Lewis this time around. It's kind of hard to say. One possible reason for that is the social conservatives might have a higher propensity to vote than the red Tories. But I am skeptical about that because the last race was these races are done by mail-in ballots. So it doesn't take a lot of effort to vote, but who knows? Maybe. Baber here, I have him about 6%. It's mostly a stab in the dark. Not really sure. Same with Hutchinson. I'm not really sure. These could be easily flipped. Baber seems to be doing an interesting campaign. I don't even really know what to call it. He's very heavily focused on COVID and the COVID mandates and the oppressive nature of them, and really government overreach in general. And he is a person, especially his family, quite aware of what government overreach feels like, considering he's an immigrant from the Soviet Union. Talk about his nation of government overreach. So that seems to be really what his campaign is arcing towards. So it's a bit hard to place. I would say he's probably more on the true blue side of the party. Possibly would give him a 5 here, and like that scale there. Maybe edging to a 6, though it's kind of hard to say. He's not getting much publicity, though that's really because Poilievre's the oppressive frontrunner, and also the media just is... not all of the media, I will say. There's some journalists who aren't terrible, but a lot of the media is just completely sucked into Poilievre derangement syndrome already, so he just gets all of the press coverage. Even if something he's saying shouldn't be controversial at all, it's still apparently controversial. Though, Baber did get some press coverage because he recently announced that he wants to fire Theresa Tam because her handling of COVID was unprofessional and silly. One of his key arguments is she asked people to wear a mask while having intercourse, which is possibly one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Like, if you are that concerned about getting sick from the other person, why are you having sex with them? What? Furthermore, Dr. Tam, someone who should know this, surgical masks do not work with prolonged intimate contact with somebody. There's a reason why people still say you have to socially distance while wearing a mask, because the mask, in use of surgical circumstances, is only useful in fleeting contact. If someone is sick, they're not designed to stop you. Like, the what gets you sick from COVID is the viral load. And if you're in the same room for a prolonged period of time, the viral load of the room goes up, and at a certain point, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're going to get sick. This isn't even controversial. This was just the common practice in most jurisdictions. But apparently, top doctor of Canada is not aware of this, and thinks that you can be in prolonged intimate contact with somebody, but wearing your mask is going to do anything. Though, again, if you think about it, it really is pretty par for the course for left-wing people. You can sacrifice everything in the world, but you cannot sacrifice sex. That's verboten. That seems to be their only value. Like these autocratic leftists. It's quite amusing. And prove me, if you don't believe me, argue against me in the comment section. I would love to see any arguments against that, but it really seems like the very hardcore autocratic leftists, they will never do anything to compromise the ability for someone to have sex. It's wild. But that's Baber's 2 minutes of media fame this race, and people, again, are attacking him. Not all the media, but some media are attacking him because apparently saying because someone was inept, they should be fired is a problem. They're not arguing, by the way, that what Baber is citing is not a reason to fire someone. They're saying you can't fire somebody because it's bad for the legitimacy of the government. What? Like, I would respect someone, a journo, who was arguing that you shouldn't fire Tam over that thing because she's not wrong, or she was right, or it's out of context or something, and try to defend Tam. But they're saying you can't fire Tam over things like that because you shouldn't be firing top doctors because it undermines credibility of the government. What? Like, just straight up from it. If you think about this from a nonpartisan perspective, you're saying that if someone thinks the doctor or the top doctor is incompetent and saying they should be fired, they're responsible for undermining the institution. But if the doctor's actually incompetent, their existence in the institution undermines the institution because people don't trust it anymore. You're dumb. You're a dumb journo. How did you even get your job if you think that? Now, again, I have full respect for any journo who wants to contest Baber's position by saying this is not the right thing to fire over, or she's correct, or oh, it was only one mistake, you shouldn't fire someone over one mistake, or something like that. Like, there's plenty of lines of defense, but the line of defense isn't you shouldn't fire someone because it undermines the credibility. That's stupid. I know. Sorry. It's like my throat. Sorry about this. And I would edit this out, but I suck at editing, so we're not going to do that. So, this all brings us to Poilievre. So Poilievre has made the apparently extremely controversial statement recently that he's going to fire the director of the Bank of Canada. And for much the same reason I just outlined for Baber saying he's going to fire Tam, he's gotten a lot of flack. There's not anyone, as far as I can tell, saying you shouldn't fire Tim Macklin. I believe that's his name. Because he was doing his job correctly, or anyone would have made these mistakes, or whatever. Like, they're not defending how he did his job. They're saying you cannot fire him because that would undermine the credibility of the Bank of Canada. What? Excuse me? That's not an argument. Saying it would undermine the credibility of an institution is not an argument for not firing somebody. If someone is incompetent, them staying in the position will undermine the credibility of the position. Would anyone really trust a toddler as a prime minister? Like, let's just picture now, if you... we'll use one of my 3-year-old cousin as an example. I'm not going to say his name, but... he's a fun little kid. He's my nephew, actually, sorry. He's a fun little kid. Fun, runs around a lot. Favorite TV show's Paw Patrol. Great little guy. He'd be a terrible prime minister at 3. And I don't think it would be unreasonable to say that if he was the prime minister at 3, we should fire him. That's not undermining the credibility of the institution. Keeping a 3-year-old at its head would be undermining the credibility of the institution. Now, this is not to say Tim Macklin is a 3-year-old. Though if someone showed he was, that would be hilarious. I wouldn't even be mad, that'd be just hilarious. But the important thing to note with this is that firing someone from a job doesn't undermine the job. Necessarily. Now, if you fired Tim Macklin because, let's say he... let's use the example of Turkey. So, Turkey actually did this. They fired their Erdogan fired the central bank leader because he wanted to raise interest rates to stabilize the currency, which every single person that I've ever met who knows anything about economics thinks you should raise the current Turkey should have raised its interest rates to stabilize its currency. I've not met a single person or read a single opinion that contradicts that. Now, that's not to say. No, I think it's pretty safe to say that there's not a single opinion that contradicts it. It doesn't even really make sense to lower interest rates to stabilize a currency that's inflating. That's just completely opposite to everything in economics. In that case, firing your central bank lead because he wants to do, your central bank governor because he wants to do the thing that every single person in the same position would do, that delegitimizes your central bank. This, though, is not what Tim Macklin did. And I believe that's his name. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure. I have too many names floating in the head, so it's kind of get them all straight sometimes. You know what? I'll just do a quick Google search. I'm pretty sure it's Tiff. I was so close. Okay, it's Tiff Macklin. Apologies. So, Tiff Macklin, under a Poilievre government, wouldn't be getting fired because he did the economically orthodox thing to do. Poilievre's argument is that Macklin should be fired because he printed in a gobsmackingly high quantities of currency. I believe the number sits at 300% increase in the Fed's balance sheets, i.e. a 300% increase in M1 currency. Well, it's not quite a 300% increase in M1 currency, but it's a bit more complicated than that, but a huge quantity of cash was injected into the economy by the Fed. I believe it's $400 billion is what it works out to be. Huge quantity of M1 money. 400 billion M1, by the way. People will be like, oh, the Canadian economy is like $1.8 trillion. 400 billion is not that much. Yeah, that's after you factor M2 and M3. This is 400 billion M1 money. Because that's all the central bank makes. It only makes M1 money. If it doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. The M1s, the M categories of money. So he prints a crap load of money. Now, the economically orthodox position of printing a gobsmackingly large quantities of money is this should precipitate monetary inflation. Not immediately, because it takes a while for the money to circulate, but once the money is circulated through the economy, this should cause a large inflation spike. If the money printing stops, it's not going to be a prolonged inflation spike, per se. Now, you have other economics that complicate. You can have self-perpetuating inflation spirals because you create the expectation of inflation. But ignoring that, if we just go a very simplified model here, you increase money. Eventually, this will increase inflation. It will inflate the prices. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. This is basic economics. Like, we're talking like this is like first year economics. Maybe second year. Regardless, it's basic economics. You cannot possibly have an economics degree without knowing this. Then, since it's obvious, and in fact, by definition guaranteed that raising the amount of money in the circulation is going to raise inflation, since inflation is the rise in monetary supply relative to the rise in productivity, That's generally speaking what it is. That's not quite exactly, but it's close enough. Inflation. So then the orthodox position would be, assuming, let's just give for the benefit of the doubt, Tiff Macklem the benefit of the doubt here, that you needed to make this money or else, I don't know, something terrible would have happened to the economy. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt there. I think you can argue that was unnecessary, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt here. The orthodox position then is that this will cause inflation, so the bank should take steps to stop inflation. What does Tiff Macklem do last year? He denies that inflation's coming, or he says it's transitory, or he says it's going to go away, or it's not going to be that bad, and does nothing to raise interest rates until, I believe, March. Maybe February, but I'm pretty sure it was March. And at this point, in May, we're at 6.8%. And it will also worth noting that even in January and February, we were at 4%. We were above the inflation target that his job is to maintain. This is not a case of we're expecting him to do something that wasn't his job. His only job as the governor of the Bank of Canada is to maintain 2% inflation right now. That's what his job description is. Nothing else. 2% inflation. Okay. So, he doesn't do anything to deal with the inflation in in December, in January, in February, waits till March. And again, every economist who's being honest with you will tell you that if you print a large quantity of money, it's going to cause inflation. That's literally the main cause of inflation. So, Tiff Macklem prints a large quantity of money, doesn't do anything to start curbing the inflation ball early, waits till it's already record highs. I believe he waited till it was 5% before starting to do things. They double check me. I don't plan these videos too heavily. I have a few talking points and I just kind of go where they go, so I don't have all the details offhand. But it waited till the inflation was unacceptably high to start doing something. And now we're at 6.8%. And yes, the central bank's finally raising interest rates, but a lot of the damage has already occurred. And I will also note, 6.8% is underreporting because it doesn't factor in housing, like the cost of buying a house, only mortgage payments. And mortgage payments are artificially low because interest rates until now have been artificially low. You get the point. So already right there, I think it's a very strong case that he is someone that is a fireable offense. He had one job, literally, and he failed that job. He did a thing that caused him to fail the job. He, as the governor of the Bank of Canada, has the final decision on how much money is printed. As the governor of the Bank of Canada, he has the final decision on what to do to raise the central bank interest rate. He printed a bunch of money and waited too long to raise interest rates. That is his fault. He's the leader. He takes the blame. Now, maybe you should argue that some people elsewhere in the Bank of Canada should be fired. Maybe. Though, as the leader of the Bank of Canada, he is explicitly to blame. It is his fault. Just as the Prime Minister is at fault if his spending programs, or hers, cause problems. Now, doesn't mean Prime Minister is always accountable, but just because someone can get out from accountability does not mean another person should. And I think it is also worth noting that not only do we have this very compelling argument I just did, I think there's also a very compelling argument to be made that we didn't need to print $400 billion of money to get through COVID. Now, I'm not really going to get into that because the video is already at 40 minutes at this point. If you want me to, I'll make an addendum video that talks about it, but that's neither here nor there. That argument at this point just further strengthens the first one. But this is what's been in the storm all through the news. And to the credit of Poilievre, he is not caving. He's holding his ground and re-articulating his position. Something that conservatives in Canada have historically not done very well. And people, mostly establishmentarian or left-leaning people, are very upset with this. Oh no, you're going to undermine the credibility. Well, what's more undermining the credibility of the Bank of Canada? Pretending that a governor who made a mistake cannot be removed? Or firing governors who made mistakes, huge mistakes, consequential mistakes, to me, firing someone who by any good measure legitimately failed at their job actually strengthens the criteria, the legitimacy of the institution. And you will also note, every single article that's attacking Poilievre over this is not defending Tiff Macklem. Or if they are, it's half-hearted, not a real argument. They're just saying he can't be fired because it would undermine the credibility of the bank. They're not saying he shouldn't be fired because he didn't do anything wrong. If someone did something wrong, and you cannot prove that they didn't do it wrong, they should be fired. I'll rephrase that. If someone violates their contract, and you can prove they did, and you cannot defend why they did it satisfactorily, they should be fired. Pretty self-explanatory, I think. But we are where we are. I don't think we should be that surprised, and I don't think this is going to affect the race one iota. Some people are saying he's going to make him unelectable. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to affect anything at all. In fact, it might actually strengthen Poilievre's position in the long term. You also see people arguing in this race that, well, Poilievre is being so nasty, or Charest's being nasty back to Poilievre, or Lewis or Brown, or blah, 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 blah. People are talking so much about how nasty this race is, and it's just like, this one, I really think comes down to a lot of the politicos are Gen Xers and Boomers. That's not to be derogatory, that's just what it is. They're in their 50s and 60s, a lot of them. Especially the ones criticizing are in those demographics. And I think what the reason that is because those, in Canada, those demographics grew up in a time when people, for lack of a better term, didn't really try to argue with each other. So they see argument as bad, which is just mind-boggling. I will give a personal example here. I watched both debates. Though, if you watch the live streams with me, not super intently, but I did rewatch them later. And the argumentation I saw in the debates, and the bickering I saw in the debates, and the attacks I saw in the debates, well, the content is different. Sorry, the substance is different. The idea behind them and the motivation for them is exactly the kind of argumentation you see in a relationship with someone you've been with for a while. Now, I'll expand on that. Many of you who watch the channel know I have a girlfriend named Lexi. Wonderful lass. Like any relationship, we fight occasionally. It is what it is. That's relationships. Our fighting in a relationship is very much in line with how the fighting in this race can be. In that, let's pick Poilievre calling Charest not a true conservative because he did X, Y, Z, W things. Now, that's not... There's nothing in my life... Or we've not had an argument where it's like, you're not a real person because you did these things, and you're not a real boyfriend because you've done these things. It's more like, you said you're going to do these things and you didn't do them. What are you doing? Or, I asked you to do this and you didn't do it. What gives? Stuff like that. Or we'll have a disagreement on how we want to organize something, or how we want to... plenty of things. I can't think of them all. Sometimes we get in a toss-up because we're trying to talk over text, and talking over text is stupid. Don't talk over text, people. Never. Don't even text, not even once. No, ignore me there. But it happens, right? And the words we're saying are different, but the idea behind them is the same. In this case, Poilievre is saying to Charest that I do not trust you, that you're going to do anything you're saying you're going to do because you've done these things in the past, and you've not proven to me since then that you're different. That is what Poilievre's attacks on Charest that he's a liberal are about. It has nothing... I mean, it is literally to do about politics in policy, but it's specifically that Poilievre does not trust Charest. He doesn't think other people should trust Charest because he's done these things. In a lot of regards, that is very similar to a regular argument with any other person over any other thing. And I suspect a lot of these journos who are in their late 40s, 50s, 60s, not all of them, but a lot of them, never learned how to argue healthily. They do not know how to argue with someone they want to either they're in a relationship with or they're friends, and be able to put it back and have a happy time afterwards with. They don't know how to let bad or past grievances be past grievances. Forgive and forget. And the reason I say this is you look at it. You look at people in those age range, they have one of the highest divorce rates in history. Now, you could argue that the fact that no fault divorce exists precipitates this, but that's a whole other discussion for a whole other time. The point stands. They have one of the highest divorce rates in history. Huge divorce rates. What does a divorce rate mean? Especially if someone's been married for 20 years. What does a divorce mean? It means that these two people have an irreconcilable difference that they don't know how to solve. And almost all of these, coming from personal experience, having had many of my parents' friends get divorced, or having a lot of friends whose parents are divorced, it always stems down to they cannot communicate properly with each other. And that's why I think this attack that this race is too heated and too nasty is coming from. It's a lot of people who don't understand what healthy arguing looks like, considering any arguing to be unhealthy. That's wrong. No arguing is actually worse than arguing. If you never argue, then as soon as you have a disagreement, your relationship ends. Or in a party sense, if you can never publicly discuss topics and publicly talk to each other about, I don't trust you because of this, you can never satisfy that. I will give an example. Let's say Charest wins. Does anyone believe the Conservative Party is going to stay together? At all? This isn't because Poilievre's attacking Charest. Poilievre is attacking Charest precisely because the party won't stay together if Charest wins. I know a lot of people who are Conservative Party members. I've talked to them. They will leave the party if Charest wins. They do not trust him. They're sick of red Tories saying one thing to win and then lying about it and doing another thing when they've won, such as O'Toole. So in a lot of ways, the party will break. Will it completely break? I don't know. I can't predict that. We have some speculative polling from Leisure, and Leisure is one of the better Canadian pollsters, that Charest winning would actually reduce Conservative vote share compared to Poilievre and increase People's Party vote share. That's not a coincidence. Some Conservatives will be leaving the party. Not a lot. Not necessarily a lot, but in the last poll we had for it is about 2%, 2 percentage points worth, from 30 to 28. At 30 to 28, that's not a big deal, sure. But if 2 percentage point leaves the People's Party, and they don't come back, how is the Conservatives going to win an election? Just realistically speaking, if you're losing votes to your right and you're losing votes to your left, how can you win? We're not talking about, like, for example, the Ontario race, where the NDP and the Liberals are hopelessly dividing each other because they're competing with some of the main areas where both are competitive, they're competing with each other. No, nationally in Canada, the Liberals dominate Montreal, the Liberals dominate Toronto and the GTA, Liberals dominate Ottawa, they dominate Lower Mainland BC, they dominate the Maritimes. So, the only way the Conservatives can win is to consolidate vote share. At this point, barring voter fatigue, it's naive to assume the Liberals are going to lose vote share. So the only way they're going to win is to get NDPers, Greens, People's Party, Bloc to come to their tent. All the polling I've seen suggests there's not going to be NDPers switching tents. Greens are split. Actually, I think the Greens prefer Poilievre more. The People's Party obviously prefers Poilievre more. And Lewis, to be fair. Other voters prefer Lewis and Poilievre. And Bloc is split between Poilievre and Charest. So this nasty, quote-unquote nasty arguing isn't about personal attacks. It's about the integrity of the Conservative Party. And the important thing is, if Charest was convincingly not a Liberal, this wouldn't be happening. No one was attacking Peter MacKay as a Liberal. But Charest's record is is much closer to the federal Liberals than the Conservatives, at least from what I've seen. Now, if Charest was owning that, and not playing down his record, you could have an actual open discussion. But since Sheree's being dishonest, same thing with Brown, since he's being dishonest in how he's campaigning, the discussion can't be about policy. It has to be about trust. I've spoken much about Sheree. I'll speak about Brown for a second. He was elected the leader of the PCs in Ontario in 2018. Not 2018. Whatever. 2016, I think? Doesn't matter. He campaigned on being a social conservative. He campaigned on revoking sex education, of opposing the carbon tax. Gets elected, becomes leader, immediately supports the carbon tax, says the social conservatives are a dying breed who are holding down the party, and immediately flips on almost everything he campaigned on. And now he's campaigning in this race. And he's saying, in the emails that I've seen, that he's trying to quote the social conservatives again. He's trying to play down what he's done. And since he's doing this, and no one believes him, you can't have a discussion about politics or policy because no one really believes the policies Brown's saying because of what he's done. He's destroyed his own credibility, so no one can have that discussion. Of the politicians that we have who do have credibility, like Lewis, like Baber, like Aitchison, like Poilievre, they're pretty much in agreement on every single issue, so there's nothing to say. I doubt Poilievre's going to be like, oh, no, you can't fire Tam. He might not personally do it, but I think he understands the logic behind it. Maybe he will do it. I don't know. Similarly, they supported the trucker protest, so there's nothing to say there. They support doing things on housing. Not much to say there. They say it in different ways, but they all have the same goal. They have slightly different plans, but in a race, no one's going to care if you're articulating, oh, my plan is slightly better than your plan. We both have a plan on doing something, but mine's going to be 5% more efficient. It doesn't really get you anywhere. In fact, at that point, you're better off just speaking more about yourself than talking about the other guy. Because talking about the other guy gives him publicity too. Or her, I guess, in the case of Lewis. So, the reason why it seems nasty is because all of the air and all of the oxygen is between Brown and Shireen Poilievre, because Poilievre's outspoken and Shireen and Brown are pretending to be someone they're not by pretending their records don't count and don't matter, and they've not convinced anyone that they've changed. Or, more importantly, why they would have changed. In the case of Brown, it was 5 years ago he said those things. What happens in 5 years that goes from social conservatives are a dead weight to you trying to court social conservative voters? He actually tried this in emails. I don't have them to bring up, but he did. So it's just like, what? Or in the case of Brown also attacking Poilievre with the face veils, when he also didn't speak out against the face veils. What? So, yes, there's argumentation in the race, there's attacks in the race, but all of that is because there's actual argument being made, actual discussion about trust and integrity. And it seems like a lot of journos don't understand what a healthy argument about trust looks like. And I would even argue Brown and Charade don't seem to know. Poilievre seems to know. Brown and Charade don't, or they're feigning ignorance to try to get the support of the politicos, but joke's on them. I don't actually know any conservatives who trust mainstream news at all. So, I don't know who you're trying to court there. Oh no, you got the Toronto Star backing you. Ah, shucks. What a checkmate. But I will finish that here. A bit longer than normal, but I don't want to cut off my points too much. So, if you enjoyed the video, please like, share, subscribe, comment below what you thought. If I'm off base, if I'm correct, where you see the race going, if you think there's possibly upsets or how things might go going forward. There's still plenty of time in the race. I think it ends in September, so we have a lot of time. If you want to see more stuff on this, follow me on Twitter at @BagwellPolling. I post things about videos coming up, any projects, and I post random memes about politics. According to my focus group of Lexi, she enjoys them, so maybe you guys will too. Otherwise, make sure you I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time with an Ontario update.